Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. What's more important, a feeling of psychological safety or having rigorous physical safety controls in place? Let's dive into this safety roundtable discussion where we go through exactly that. Hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
So welcome to today's session, and we're going to be speaking about psychological safety versus safety controls, which matters more. And I thought this would be an interesting topic because it's two areas that obviously we focus a lot of time and effort and attention on. And are the two mutually exclusive? Are they compatible? Should we be doing them at the same time? Should we be doing one before the other? And which has the biggest effect? And those are the sort of topics that I think it'd be great to have a discussion about in today's session. So that's the plan, essentially. So if you've not been to a safety roundtable before, these are designed to be interactive. So I'm here to host and try to prompt discussion, and I'll obviously give you some thoughts on the topic myself. But really, I'm interested to hear from you guys. So very much want this to be an interactive session where everybody can join in and give us their thoughts, experiences, feelings, opinions, etc. We run these sessions every fortnight, and each time there's a different topic that we cover, whether that's with me introducing it or with a guest as well sometimes. So I thought I'd start. I've not done this before on here, so let's see if I can make it work. I thought I'd start by doing a poll. So everybody in attendance, if you're on the Zoom, should be getting a pop-up, and it'll say which matters most, psychological safety or physical safety. So give us your votes. And let's get straight into being interactive. Who fancies just giving a quick overview as to why they voted the way they did? Feel free to go to reactions, raise your hand, and I'll call you up, or just unmute and let's get into it.
Yeah, so I basically said physical safety because even if the guy does not participate, psychologically in safety, a barrier will still prevent him from accessing hazards.
Yeah. Thanks, Rudy. I like that. So is that kind of the way that you are approaching safety in your organization, trying to really make it as safe as possible physically?
Well, obviously both. It's got to be a combination between the two. But yeah, if I had to choose one, I'd probably go with physical.
Okay, good stuff. Anybody who voted? So here we've got 60% have voted for psychological safety. Who voted for psychological safety, and who fancies explaining the bit about why they voted that way? I can't see who voted what, frustratingly.
Yes. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
Yes,
Kennedy, hi.
Yes, I voted for psychological safety. The reason being that no matter how safe you are physically, if psychologically your mind is not balanced, then there's every tendency that you do yourself physical harm. Because we've seen situations where people who are physically fine but psychologically not fit commit suicide and things like that. So if your psychology is not safe, then physically, I don't think you can be safe. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a really valid point. So we'll close this poll. So the people in the room, it's 62% psychological safety matters more, 38% physical safety matters more. So we'll close the poll. for today's participants. Thank you for voting, and thank you for the two people that shared their views. And I suppose what's interesting about that is um, they both referenced the other, and part of the question here, I guess, is can we do one without the other? Should we do one without the other? Do we need to sequence them, etc., etc.? So there's a lot to delve into. I'm just going to share again and just give you some stats from uh, LinkedIn. So I ran in the last few days a series of polls on LinkedIn, and I basically said which matters more. I gave the same poll on LinkedIn to people there as you guys, and I ran this poll in a number of groups on LinkedIn, health and safety related groups. By the way, if you're not a member, we have a group called Safety and Risk Success, a group on LinkedIn. So do get involved in that group. Um, and the results there were the other way around to what we voted here in the room today. They were saying there were 875 people voted, so it's decent, quite a decent sample size. 59% voted physical, 41% voted psychological. So we've got a divergence in opinion from those of us on the call today versus people on LinkedIn. And I suppose that again underscores this point that it's an interesting discussion because there are different perspectives and two sides to every coin. William has mentioned in the chat it's his first time, so he might be a bit quiet. No, I think that the opposite. You should dive straight in. Is definitely my advice. Um, as always, guys, if you want to jump in and make any comments, feel free just to go to reactions, raise your hand, and I'll call you up and chat because yeah, really interested to get people's opinions on this topic. So here's my strong belief, and I use this phrase a lot when I'm speaking to people in all sorts of contexts, not just about safety, but it absolutely, in my opinion, applies to safety. And it's a maxim which is environment dictates performance. What do we mean by that? Well, if we think about, let's take safety out of this. Let's think about um, Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo or Erling Haaland or one of these really, really tip top footballers or another elite athlete in a different sport. Um, Obviously, those people have innate ability and they have drive and determination and mental fortitude and so on and so forth to get to the top of their game. But a lot of what is happening for them is the environment in which they are surrounded. So if they go to the training ground, they have the best facilities, they have excellent nutrition. Um, in their team environment, they have world-class teammates that are helping them to deliver the performances on the pitch. Um, they have great managers and coaches and physiotherapists who will support them. And so, if you took one of those players and you took them away from the great clubs where they were at their prime, and you plonked them into and I can say this because I'm a supporter, Kettering Town FC, who are in the I think we're in the eighth or ninth division or something like that, and we've got a tin pot rickety ground, we've got a tin pot rickety training ground. They're going to be playing with people who are not on that level, etc., etc., etc. We can't expect the same performance level from those players in that environment as we can in the environments in which they're thriving at the moment. And I've seen this in business contexts, in safety contexts. Obviously, there's a sporting context to this as well. Business, if you're trying to um, grow your business and you're spending time with let's say you're a business owner like me, and you're spending time with people who are really struggling in business and not getting on and not succeeding, that's kind of going to drag you down. Um, there's an expression or a feeling around, you are the average of I think it's the half dozen people you spend most time with. Again, that's a great example of environment dictating performance. Um, in safety, uh, I've seen this time and time again, and I've seen this from both sides of the coin we're discussing today. I've seen this from the perspective of the physical environment dictating performance, and I've also seen it from the perspective of the intangible environment, this safety culture, this psychological safety perspective on environment dictating performance as well. And I've seen how both of these sides of the coin really can have a profound effect on safety outcomes. I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts on that or any examples or any better analogies than the ones that I gave that they want to share. But if you do, then feel free to suggest something. But this is really, really a firm belief for me. We've got to get the environment right. Um, if we think about safety, what sometimes can happen is blame. So the person the person that slipped over in my world, for example, um, can get blamed for the fact that they've had an accident. Um, but it's that environment that they're in that has really driven an accident to happen in most cases, I would say. Nobody gets up in the morning and thinks, I know what I'll do today. I'll go to work and have an accident, or I'll go out and to a shopping centre and have an accident, or whatever it might be. Nobody has that intention. Our actions are a result of obviously ourselves and our innate um, abilities and physical state and so on and so forth. But it's really, really a lot of it is around the environment that we're in. So if we think about that from the perspective of safety, I'd love to get your views on that as a hypothesis. And then if we start to think about environment dictating performance in safety, I wanted to pose a couple of questions for us. So, why wouldn't we have what would prevent us from having the right level of physical controls in place? And on the same token, what would stop us from achieving a level of psychological safety within our organization? Let's think about some of the challenges, some of the blockers. If we can get on board with environment dictates performance, what is it that could stop us from achieving the right environment physically, psychologically? Who's going to be brave? Give us some thoughts on this. Adele in the chat, I think ergonomics in the UK is an afterthought. Um, certainly have had other people I've had conversations with that felt something similar to that. Um, so yeah, wouldn't disagree with you there at all. So there's something here around misperceptions, perhaps. I certainly see this in my field, where why wouldn't we have the right physical controls in place for to prevent slip accidents? Well, um, you know, it doesn't matter. We just put a sign out and it's okay. It's a bit of an afterthought. Um, we've got entrance matting, so that's fine. We've got a cleaning contractor who cleans the floor, so it must be fine. That floor looks like it wouldn't be too slippery, so that must be fine. There's a lot of misconceptions that come up in my field, and Adele's mentioned that it could be the same in ergonomics as well. Lots of stuff happening in the chat. I really want some people to be brave and come and talk to me. Um, an obstacle here from Gareth. We've always done it this way. Why change? Yep. From a psychological safety perspective, that is absolutely an obstacle we to overcome. Richard, you've got your hand up. Come and say hello. What do you think about this topic?
Hi, Christian. I think part of we have a very poor culture when it comes to training and giving people the skills to be able to lead safety. Everything comes down to it's the safety professional's job. Can't speak around the rest of the world, but certainly in the UK, there is a major problem with getting the people who should be responsible for keeping people safe to physically accept those roles, those legal and moral responsibilities to actually do so. And until visible felt leadership starts to be more prevalent in that way, it's going to have an impact on psychological safety. We've all seen this with COVID, where everybody, when we're all queuing outside for supermarkets and there's hand wipes and disinfectant everywhere, but how quickly did people stop using it? And you still see a lot of people now with masks on, trying to keep out of the way of everybody else. So as much as anything else, people's perception on whether something is safe or not also varies, but there is a fundamentally bad problem with leadership when it comes to anybody who's not working in the field of health and safety.
Yeah, yeah. That's definitely a challenge, isn't it? And it's something we've we've touched on before on these sessions. You know, how do we sell safety to people that aren't safety professionals? And I suppose what's interesting is that um, we all have, well, I say we all have, but the vast majority of us have excellent risk perception and risk awareness in our day-to-day lives. So, you know, if you think about driving a car or even crossing the road, you know, there's quite risky things that we do, and we don't even think about it. Um, so we do have that ability to understand risk and take steps to mitigate risk, and think about risk in the round. Um, but yeah, sometimes in organizations it doesn't quite happen in that same way. I wonder sometimes if that's, you know, really just driven by the cost. And a couple of people have mentioned, you know, in the chat, yeah, physical controls cost money. Mike, your thoughts? Oh, you're muted, Mike, I think.
Hear me now?
Yeah, I got you now, loud and clear.
There we are. Yeah, I think Rich is absolutely right. It is about management and yeah, particularly when it comes to psychological safety that yeah, if people aren't listened to, eventually they stop speaking out. And that's also why I voted for psychological safety rather than physical controls, because if people have the ability to speak out, they will actually tell you about the physical safety barriers that are there to their workplace. And at the end of the day, the people doing the job are the people who know best what the risks are. If they haven't got psychological safety to be able to tell the managers and the safety professionals what's actually going on in the workplace, you're just never going to get there.
Yeah. So let me challenge you a bit on that, Mike. Just for the fun, just for fun, um, and to provoke a discussion. Do you think that it's possible for people to feel psychologically safe if we don't have these physical controls in place in the first time? I mean, that my view is that we should be focusing first on the physical stuff, because unless we get that right to at least a decent degree, we're really going to struggle to get people to feel psychologically safe enough to, you know, to speak out. But
I think that depends upon whether you've actually, I think that there's a certain level of safety. I think the legal minimum is sort of expected. I think if you're below the legal minimum, then absolutely you need to have legal minimum in place. But I think if you're
yeah,
aspiring to do better, then psychological safety comes first. But absolutely, if you haven't got legal minimum in place, then
mm,
people are not going to feel safe to talk, to speak up, or to actually do anything at all.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. It's the Maslow hierarchy, isn't it? That I can't remember exactly what it is now, but it talks about, you know, to reach fulfillment, I think is the sort of end goal, or it's something like that, fulfillment anyway. You have to go
It's
through these
basically
certain
the
steps.
bottom level is the one that basically anything that you need to keep you alive. It's your basic
Exactly.
subsistence.
Yeah,
Your second
exactly.
one then is your safety events,
Yeah.
and then everything else follows above that.
Yeah. And then you get into the sort of uh so if you took that as an example, I think I'm right in interpreting it as the physical. You need that physical safety or a certain uh, level, as you've said, of physical safety before you can sort of go on and sort of
And
do
build
maybe
from
more
there.
than that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Rudy, you've got your hand up again. Come on, come and chat.
Yeah, so that's it's quite an interesting subject there because I would also say, how do you build psychological safety? So my view is, you know, when you get to a business, and people don't report things, that's considered poor culture, right? So how do we build this? And in my experience is you have to put physical things in place to engage them, initial engagement from the workforce. But then afterwards, it's important to follow through. So if
Yeah,
say they say we need a new barrier, and as soon as possible we get this barrier up, and that's how you build psychological safety in the workplace by having implementation, based on their recommendations quite quickly.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm going to share. I've already shared a little bit, but I'm going to share my view on overall how I would respond to the question of which matters more in this in a minute, and I'm kind of quite aligned with you there, Rudy. I think. Um, Peter.
Yeah. Um, so there always seems to be a bit of a thought process that these are mutually exclusive, and that you have one, then you have the other, not necessarily at the same time, and that it's somehow linked to the maturity of safety in the organisation. But I
Mm,
think it's important that everyone understands that there's a very large section of workforce who don't have any control on the environment that they're working in.
that's
A
very
really
true.
good, a really good, analogy would be people in the military, first responders, going into environments that are completely out of their control, are hazardous. Don't have, they don't have any influence on a lot of the physical controls that you would want to put in there.
Mm,
And then the less control over you have the physical part, the more reliant you are on the psychological safety to get that feedback from the people who are working in those environments as to what works and what doesn't.
yeah.
If you're able to achieve safety through physical controls and removing hazards, if you work on your hierarchy and say, right, I've eliminated all my hazards, no one's at risk, then psychological safety is not so important because you haven't got any hazards available. But the less control you have over your environment, you need more psychological safety to get that interaction with the people at the front line to be able to put in additional controls that you might need.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for raising that. It's something that I speak a lot to uh, organizations who have, remote workforces like, delivery vans, or as you say, the army or whoever it might be, or construction workers, um, or railway trackside workers. And we're talking about, they want my help to mitigate their slip risks and trip risks. And it's exactly that where you can only control the controllable, and if you're out and about and in different environments, moving around, where you have no control over that physical environment, then of course that definitely limits what you can do to mitigate that risk. And then what you need to do then, I believe, is put as much emphasis as you can on things that you can control. And so you're right that that's where the psychological safety um, side could absolutely be at the forefront in those kind of areas. So yeah, no, thank you for that. That's a really really good point. Richard, you got your hand up again.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point about the likes of first responders, military, because the same would apply to sort of Coast Guard and lifeboats as well. The big difference between bodies like that compared to average people in industry is the amount of time that's spent training and practicing. So they always try and find new scenarios. They'll always reinvent. They'll always re-practice. They'll always take lessons back and learn from it. So although they never know exactly what situation they're going into, they're as rehearsed as they actually can be, and they've built very close, cohesive teams that work together. And you don't tend to see that to the same extent in sort of civilian life, with people working away in industry in general, from that point of view. So training skills and competency, that's one of the big things that's going to help build the psychological safety, and having the people working together as a cohesive team and having the right equipment for doing the job is part of the physical controls that supports it.
Yeah, yeah. John in the chat has said actions speak louder than words, and I think, again, going back to what I do, um, talking to people about, let's say, railway trackside workers, um, they're not going to have that level of training, as you have said, that somebody in the military might do, or a first responder might do. So therefore, can we do something a little bit more? Can we think about, maybe not so, the same degree of training, but, could we give them a bit of training on how to balance better? Could we give them some martial arts training on, like, how to fall better? There's all sorts of creative things you can do that would give that little bit of extra support. And I suppose that would sort of tick the boxes, both of making them feel psychologically safer, but also sort of you're not physically making the environment they're working in safer, but you're sort of making them physically safer by upskilling them, training them, supporting them, etc. Gareth.
Afternoon, Christian. Yeah, I think a lot of people said here these do go hand in hand. But one of the earlier comments is about improving training. So if we improve training and our communication, and raised awareness of some of these hazards and risks, people would feel less psychologically safe. They walk into a warehouse, we hand them a high-vis vest, and they go, "Oh, I'm safe." But yeah, you got fork trucks running around at 10 miles per hour. There's not many footpaths or barriers up. When you point that out, they go, "Oh, I don't feel as safe now." But when you have those physical controls in place and we explain the reasons for using them, then people will feel, "Oh, this is why I use these physical controls. I stay behind the barriers. I follow the footpaths. I don't put my hand there." And they've got the psychological safety from that. But yeah, they do go hand in hand. I wasn't sure which to vote for at the start. I fell on the side of physical control.
Yeah.
But there's so much hand in hand, and we can argue all day which is best. But I think we need to communicate better why we have these controls in place, so people will see the need to use them.
Yeah, yeah, no, fully on board with you there. The better we can explain, the better we can encourage, the better we can influence, the better we can listen to these people that we're trying to keep safe. The better outcomes we're going to achieve fundamentally. I'm glad you said you weren't sure which to vote for, because that was kind of the idea. I was hoping that it's not a straightforward question, but it's a conversation that I think is a valuable one. So thanks to everybody so far that's joined in. A couple more thoughts that I think are worth pondering on would be, what could be the negative outcomes if we over rely on one or the other of these factors? So if we over rely on psychological safety and we don't have enough physical safety, what could happen there? What could be some of the potential negative outcomes that might arise off the back of that situation? And on the flip side, what if we focus solely or overly on the physical controls and we kind of negate or neglect the psychological safety? Have we got any thoughts or examples or insights on what that might look like and what some of the outcomes of that could be? I'll give you an example from my world. So I remember doing a presentation once to an IOSH group, um, which was the logistics and retail group, talking about slip prevention, and had some great feedback and quite a few people coming up to me afterwards and, let's explore doing things and so on and so forth, which is great. And then I got chatting to one guy, and he said to me, yeah, all this slip testing and making sure we've got the right matting and doing the right cleaning and all this other stuff. We're just not ready for that because we're really working on our psychological safety for now and our safety culture. We've got to get that in place first, because otherwise it's a waste of time doing all this physical stuff. And I didn't argue with him because I don't like conflict at the best of times, but I'm not I'm not turning up at an IOSH event to get into an argument with somebody. But I really violently disagreed with his conclusion there because I just think that if you don't have these basics in place in terms of the physical controls, and if you're over relying on this kind of psychological safety aspect and over relying on individuals to be spotting things and so on and so forth, I just think you're not doing the what you need to do to protect yourself and to protect your organization, protect the people that are in it. So I can see a risk of that personally. Any thoughts on this, guys?
I tend to agree with you on that, Christian, because if people go straight into behaviour-based safety and don't put the physical controls and measures into place, the one thing that psychological safety cannot do is accurately take into account everybody's mood, distractions, personal aspects of their life that affect how they're feeling when they turn up for work.
Yeah.
Essentially, everybody's had a car journey where you've got to the other end, and then you sit there and you think, how did I get here?
Yeah.
So over reliance on psychological safety puts everybody at risk from that point of view, both from the people who are going to be physically injured, but also through to the boards of directors whose necks are on the block if a prosecution comes calling. And physical controls, if you don't have the right levels of maintenance, safety checks, and all the sort of periphery around having physical controls in place, they start to fail and people start to make up their own rules on what do I need to do to keep myself safe at the time. And then you've lost control of both physical safety and psychological safety.
Yeah, I think you're definitely leaving yourself at risk from a legal perspective, whether that's a criminal or a civil claim or prosecution against you if you don't have the right sort of physical controls in place. But then there's a flip side as well, isn't there? Which is, if we go too overboard with the physical controls, are we at risk of health and safety gone mad? Are we at risk of complacency? Are we at risk of people not speaking out, even if they do spot something, because we're going overboard on it, and they don't want to upset anybody, or they don't feel as if they can speak out. There's lots of risks on that side of things as well. Has anybody ever experienced a situation where they've come into, perhaps a new organization, and they found that there was an over reliance on one of these two sides of the coin? Has anybody kind of come across something like that before? Just muted myself to cough. It's not something that I've seen myself, but from that perspective of coming into a new organization, but I've definitely experienced people who've sort of been too far leaning one way or the other in my professional career, for sure. So, Hayden, you got your hand up, yeah?
Yeah, sorry. I was a bit late there. I
That's
think
all
I
right.
have seen it once at a household recycling center.
Yeah.
We came on board with them, and the previous consultant had purely relied on physical controls, thinking about who their audience is, i.e., the people they're keeping safe. So they did rely on physical controls too much and it made things a bit too difficult. There was barriers all over the place, um, where they're unnecessary, all this sort of stuff, and no one sort of took upon themselves to go, you know, this is how I'm going to keep myself safe. I think we should do this. I think we should do this. Everyone just followed what signage said, what barriers said, and no one took that initiative. And I think with the psychological safety, you definitely need people to take that bit of initiative. Where I work now, I'm the only health and safety qualified person in the business, and I look after
Yeah.
49 different branch managers or distribution center managers. I couldn't do it without them, without their ideas. And I think that's what people forget a lot of the time when it's about the people we're looking after. Um, that's our main customer. That's who we're doing this for.
Yeah. 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 How long did it take you to kind of overcome that situation then, do you think?
It's I don't work with I don't work with that consultant anymore.
Right.
But people that still do work there, it's still a challenge for them to get the employees on that site on board.
Mm.
Because they're just too reliant on the physical stuff. Don't report accidents and incidents, and it's still a challenge for them, I think.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, I suppose the bigger you are as an organization as well, and the longer that you've been doing it, as somebody said earlier, we've always done it this way, then the harder that sort of ship is to turn in the ocean. So it doesn't surprise me that they're still maybe struggling with it. Yeah, Steve.
Just an ongoing thought from that as well. If in those situations there are an unnecessary amount of controls, I think sometimes it can have a false sense of security, but also the added cost
Yeah.
of that as well. I mean, it's like, people think, oh, this, we're completely safe and nothing can possibly go wrong, but there is an element of, still, training requirements. Obviously, the regular risk assessment should identify what the controls should be, like in a proportionate way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it can lead people to think that they're safer than they might otherwise be.
Yeah. 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 Complacency. Yeah, definitely a big challenge. And yeah, the cost. I mean, that's always the challenge around anything around safety, isn't it? From a going back to what Richard raised earlier about the leadership team and the financial ROI and stuff. People want to, in my experience, or leaders of businesses and organizations want their team and their customers to be safe, but they'd rather spend £10 and be safe than spend £20 and be super, 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 super safe, if you know what I mean. That's my sort of experience with it. So guarding against that is is definitely something we have to do, because if we're sort of pitching for more and more investment, more and more money, at some point we're going to be sort of running into a bit of a brick wall, I think, from a,
Mhm.
from a
Well,
perspective.
absolutely. And one of the things that adding to that is, for example, gas detection is a good area. Because you might have a gas detection system installed in a specific space, doesn't mean that we now no longer need to leak test the cylinders when we're installing them, or we need to leak test any of the equipment, or the pipe work.
Yeah,
It's in addition to, it's not something, it's replacing. It's still good practice, and the training should still be taking place for those individuals to do that.
yeah,
Even if you have got the gas detection systems in place, that's just the fail safe, the backup, like the kind of last port of call sort of thing.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. Great, thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. So my view is kind of what we were talking a little bit about earlier, which is that it's kind of, I see it as a bit like this pyramid where I think essentially to get to a certain level of performance, you've got to focus on getting those physical controls right and laying that um, as a foundation. Forgive the typo on the slide. I'm going to change that now because it's really annoying me. Can't have a B in the middle of a slide, in the middle of the word improvement, because that just will that will really bother me. So yeah, I think in my experience is that lots of people will feel they've got the physical controls to a good point, and then they find they're struggling with both the psychological safety bit and the actual outcomes of, what are our incident rates and so on. And I think unless you've got that foundation really well in place, like Mike said earlier, and I would sort of say that actually it's probably a little bit beyond the legal compliance perspective. Um, my experience is that being legally compliant is really, really the absolute baseline. You need to go a little bit beyond that to get to a certain point. But that the physical controls will only take you so far. So you need to get those foundations right, get that baseline in place from which you can build. But it's the psychological safety side of things that is going to keep you improving and keep you doing better and better. The physical controls are important, but they're only going to take you so far, in my opinion. Um, anybody want to violently agree or disagree with me on that? Go on, Peter.
I'm not going to violently disagree, but you've got to have a base level of psychological safety to have good physical controls, because we can't all be experts in everything. And so you're reliant on the people with the expertise to advise us on the correct physical controls. But if they don't feel psychologically safe to raise the controls that may actually have a significant cost but be the most effective, you're never going to end up with effective physical controls in the first place.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because we should be encouraging our frontline staff, our shop floor staff, whatever term you want to use, the people that are doing the work that we're trying to protect them whilst they're doing it, to be feeding back and inputting into the controls that we're putting in place. So yeah, I think you're spot on there. Yeah, very, very good point. Anybody else got any thoughts on this? Whilst people are thinking, in a couple of weeks, the next session, really pleased to have a great guest on. We're going to be talking about sort of doing a bit of a safety legal update with Kevin Bridges, who's a real expert. He works for Pincer Masons, so we're going to be basically sort of mapping out the health and safety legal landscape for the year ahead. So I think that's a really good one to come along to and ask some questions. Nothing too specific, because he's not going to give you free legal advice, but definitely ask some questions around principles and think about where things are going from a legal perspective. Obviously, we've got lots going on with in the world and with the economy and regulations and stuff. So I think that'll be a really, really good session. So do join us for that in a couple of weeks' time. Steve.
So yeah, just thinking about what we are saying there, with regards to reporting and psychological safety, I was just thinking, in my experience, historically, previously to my current role, one of the things that I found was quite a barrier was, the total recorded incident rates and things like this, and having digital displays that kind of show, zero lost time and zero instances, and that, in my view, didn't and doesn't help with psychological safety. As soon as that was actually removed from the place, and we were, sort of had a campaign on incident accident near miss reporting, and we're trying to engage the workforce in what we could be doing better and how, with the whole process, straight away, like, the incidents that weren't getting reported before were becoming reported, and you have a better oversight of what's actually really happening on the ground. And I just thought of that as a barrier, because that is one of the barriers I've found personally. I'd be interested to know what other people thought on that as well.
Yeah, you can definitely see that happening, can't you? Well, you did see it happening, but yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that being something that other people will be grappling with as well.
And the further down the line it gets, like if you get into sort of like we've had 100 days or 200 or 300, no one wants to be the one person that says, I had an accident.
Yeah, I mean, I did a session with Oh God, that's really embarrassing. I can't remember his name. It'll come to me in a second with Kevin and Kevin. What's his surname? Anyway, it'll come to me about zero harm and the sort of arguably the fallacy of zero harm. And you're right, that pressure really does build up, and it's kind of a bit like it's analogous to we've got all these physical controls in place. I can't be the person that speaks out about it and questions are they actually effective or not. Um, we've had so long without any incidents. I can't be the person that reports an incident for the first time, and therefore, do things get swept under the rug? And both of those are obviously really bad outcomes because what we need is transparency, and therefore a full understanding of what's going on, and then we can deal with it, right? If things are being hidden from us, or sort of avoided because of a lack of psychological safety, that's not going to help us to get to where we need to be. Yeah. Good stuff. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. I found it really useful and interesting, and I hope you did too. I think as we've kind of got to the point of looking at this from all sorts of sides, I think the answer is that there isn't one of these that matters more than the other, and they both matter a lot. And I suppose the question is, or the challenge we have to grapple with is, how do we make sure that we're doing the best we can on both sides of this, and making sure that we're not over relying on one or the other. We're not underdoing one or the other. We need to be sort of doing the Goldilocks routine of getting things not too hot, not too cold. We need to be just right. And I suppose that's the perennial challenge for those of us in safety. But one that we will continue to rise to and strive for, and do the best we can. So thank you for your attendance today. Thank you for your contributions. Really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks on another safety roundtable with Kevin from Pinson Masons, talking about the legal landscape of health and safety in 2025. Cheers, guys.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.